So today, I'll be sharing about from Ruth White, her book on the inner child, the soul, family. Highly recommend. So she talks about development. So in our development, from the years 3 or 5 to about 8, we struggle with aspects of power and authority, dominance. And in a reasonably free and encouraging environment, young children are actually very passionate beings. But to handle a 3-year-old tantrum and give the boundaries, but still leave the child with a sense of empowerment is really difficult to be a parent of a young child. So young kids become their rage. They're like, not so, but for a child, the most helpful thing is to tell them how you're feeling angry, because they become their rage. The emotions are bigger than the small being. And the art of emotional maturity isn't as simple as learning self-control, because the ability to behave appropriately within societal expectations is not there when there's an emotionally wounding environment. The disempowered and controlled experience, the sense of feeling controlled by harsh discipline that's overly harsh, will be a seething rage, a hostility, a resentment in the adult's inner child. So if the emotions are being wounded, the child, by learning self-control, is not actually going to be healed whole, and they're not going to necessarily, even if they know how to behave within societal expectations, they're not going to necessarily have the ability. So attempts by the growing adult to contain and control and respect this aspect, give it even greater autonomy. What's pushed too strenuously into the unconscious will become more powerful and directly opposes whatever the person is actively focused on in the conscious realm. So the repressed inner child self, this passion, will eventually unexpectedly erupt in the most inappropriate situations in a way the child is the emotion, and the same in adulthood. Like being controlled. What came over me? Or we wish our actions could be undone, or the words unsaid, which is emotional immaturity. And emotional control without repression and a child in touch with emotion is indicative of being able to feel appropriately. So without being overwhelmed by it is a practice. And in adolescence, we have deep emotions, feelings, passions, and ideals that we need to act out. Fervors of sexuality at the forefront, for example. Like our bodies are maturing and changing, and hormones are activated, drives are asserted, even if they're bewildering, and the peer acceptance is very important. So if a parent, a teacher, or in the living climate or the primary foundations are all good enough, we emerge positively and feeling self-active and develop compassion and tenderness and the ability to touch and be touched by the world. Emotions mellow with wisdom. So when we act out, it ripens into knowing what we feel, but also where and how to channel appropriately without repressing it. Again, repressing it with self-control, doesn't actually heal it, and it will come out. It's still there. And if we're overwhelmed by it, for example, there's a sense of disempowerment. So we're fully capable of having emotions without being governed or completely driven by them. And a seasoned quality of the true feelings can emerge, enabling the integrating of the higher principles that we're passionate about into our lives expressively. When there's too much emphasis on emotional ventilation, it can actually be counterproductive of letting off of the anger, and actually results in being led by the emotional body, even if we're not aware that it's happening, which makes it even harder to leave the hurts behind. And this is what produces irrational behavior patterns and inhibits considerations of the ability to choose. So even acting out can be addictive, which is like in and of itself a whole world. And then too much control of emotions, because what came over me, the bizarre dissociated eruptions emotionally. When we have lasting relationships in adulthood, the mundane has to be faced. So false expectations hinders enduring love and causes expectations. False expectations or no expectations, for example, it hinders enduring love and causes jealousy and possessiveness. I don't mean no expectations, I mean the wrong kind of expectation. So it shows the link between emotional feeling bodies is insufficiently activated. So rather than ensuring constancy of affection, insecurities and controlling mechanisms and clingings will actually drive apart the relationship and block growth. and of natural fidelity, which is based on mutual respect. So the insecurities cause the lack of respect, and the possessiveness and the jealousy cause clinging and controlling. When love is unable to mature, decisions about the potential are unclear, and more waiting around, staying for the wrong reasons will happen, and there will be less strength to weather the mundane, plus less likelihood of keeping the romance alive despite obstacles. With soulmates, it's the original spark. It splits into the yin and the yang and becomes complementary soul thread, a stem, each with beads, flowers of potential incarnations. And when all the again, I'm speaking for Ruth White's shearings. When all threads and beads are incarnated in return, the two strands after evolution become one. And before then, there's one flower of one stem or bead of a strand meet with the flower bead from its twin, but the twins don't always incarnate at the same time. The complete being doesn't incarnate. So as many of the seven of each, there's seven soulmates, she says, which is also in Judaism, we say. And Ruth White, it sounds like she might be Jewish. Anyway, as many of seven of each may incarnate at one time. If they meet, they're going to have a close relationship. But still, the meeting is rare, since the purpose of carnation is to gain experience. The impulse behind putting out over more than one aspect is to ensure as broad a knowledge of that historical earth era as possible. The number of beads and flowers varies by soul. Nowadays, so much work is taken on during an incarnation course, and this means that twin souls meeting is discouraged, since the two beings can be in danger of getting so absorbed that the degree to which they move forward in learning the process is lessened. You might say that the entanglement of the two is often prevented because they will not want to do their separate missions. So this perspective, so basically the range of, which to me feels like a desperation at times, to be honest, the range of available experience is so great that separately the twin souls can cover much more evolutionary ground, which is hard for me to accept, but to recognize that when they're not just wanting to be one, they're looking for oneness in the whole world, they can cover so much more ground. So this perspective feels disappointing and disconcerting that we likely won't meet our twin, but it can also settle into a realistic expectation that if we're ready and it's the right time, we will. Because anyway, if we see life as a evolutionary workspace, we understand more about the overall organization and intent behind the system we operate within, there's a sense of leadership. Leaders help others realize themselves. So it is possible to be in soulmate relationship while doing this, but both people have to be capable. So when we're insecure in ourselves, a leader is by selfless. So when we're insecure in ourselves, we seek aggressive power over others or even become victims. So there's colluding these patterns of tyranny and oppression. But if we seek control over others, we can't move to the vision of empowered individuals who mutually empower. The desire to control others comes from the fear that if they're free, they'll destroy us. And the fear of the breakdown of the old order, that we become prisoners of its structures. I'm really working with that. Wow. I want to read that again. If we seek control over others, we cannot move to the vision of empowered individuals who mutually empower, because the desire to control others comes from the fear that if they're free, they'll destroy us. And we fear the breakdown of the old order and then become prisoners of its structures. A lack of self-worth underlies the material ethos of feeling of insecurity, which can make us greedy and miserly. And I'll stop there, but before I move on in the next videos, I want to just make this personal, which I don't usually do these days. I was doing that in a lot of previous videos, but I'll say that I wrote down like 10 people who felt like they were different versions of soulmates. Now, not one of the 7 necessarily, but one of them, I found that they were a soulmate for my healing and guidance, another for healing, guidance, and enjoyment, another for enjoyment, another for healing and enlightenment, another for enlightenment, and another for guidance. And some of these were one I never met in person, one I never was intimate with, another I never was, one was a couple, at least a couple were not Jewish, which means I wouldn't even be able to have a life with them, a Jewish family and such. So anyway, for guidance, for enjoyment and healing and enlightenment, enjoyment and guidance, and finally, most recently, reflecting and love. Thank you for taking this time, and wish you a blessed day. Today has been Netzach and Netzach of the Sphere to Omer, which is the counting of the Omer, which is like the wave offering to purify us to receive the true Torah light into our vessels. And so we're cleansing our aspects of the vessels Amen to all of us. And netzach is like endurance of endurance, like victory, 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 perpetuity, infinity, eternity. So may these words really be dedicated to that in the whole world for all of us, me, you, everyone. Amen.